right, everybody, welcome to the show. We have the Fantasy Empire coming back at you. Once again, we've got Chris Vaccaro, Nelson Sousa, and Matt Modica in the house to give you the winning edge you need. So we're not going to waste your time with pleasantries, introductions, all that. If you need that, go back to last week's episode. But we are going to dive right into the meat of the show. And I'm going to have Matt just kind of talk. We're going to talk first about an FFPC Main Event board that happened recently and just kind of look at that, dive into it a little bit. So I'm going to have Matt remind everybody how the FFPC Main Event works. And we'll get that board up here and we'll get going.
Yes, good morning. The FFPC is a $2,000 entry. Every subsequent entry is $1,600. A major difference from NFFC is there is no third round reversal. Touchdown passes are worth 4 points each as opposed to 6 points each in the NFFC. There is a 1.5 point tight end premium, so that's why you'll see tight ends going so high in this format. The starting lineup is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 2 flex. So as you're looking at this board, those are the factors you need to take into consideration.
All right, sounds good. So what we're going to do is we're going to give our likes and dislikes on some of the team builds here, favorite values if we have any, favorite teams if we have any, all that kind of stuff, and we're going to try to do this as best we can for those who are listening on the podcast as well, so that if you don't have the visual of the draft board in front of you, you can still follow along. So Matt, we're going to have you lead us off here and tell us what you think about this board in general, and let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I highlighted Team 1. They started CMC, and I think after starting with him, going 4 wide receivers is the perfect move, in my opinion. You know, I am a heavy wide receiver guy, but I think they messed up here. In that 6-7 turn, they got Stroud. Absolutely love Stroud. You know, his realm of possibilities, while maybe small, is the Denver Broncos from a few years back with Peyton Manning. But taking Zamir White instead of Brock Bowers in this format, I think was an epic fail for this build. You know, you need a guy who's at least a solid with upside elite potential here, which I think Bowers is. So that's where I think this team messed up, because, I mean, Musgrave is their number 1. He might have competition with Tucker Kraft. Their number 2 is Benson. I mean, I like him. And their 3rd wide receiver is Wiley. I don't think that's the tight end room you want to go in with a main event. That's my opinion there. And Team 4, you know, I love the Breece Hall stuff. As I said, I love going heavy wide, but the hero running back, I think, is a fantastic start. Problem is, you go 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds. And, you know, I know this is set up differently. You don't have to be as wide receiver heavy, but I just think that puts you so far behind the 8 ball in chasing wide receivers, something I never want to do. So, I mean, my favorite team here is probably Team 2. Maybe not my favorite players in Devontae Adams and Michael Pittman, but it was the structure, the build. They started 4 wide. They got Kenneth Walker, Jalen Warren, and even like a Brian Robinson as their 3 running backs. But they have 2 solid tight ends here in Njoku and Bowers. So I like that build. You say, did they punt quarterback? Look, nobody wants to really draft Dak. And I know in NFFC, 3 of the last 5 years, he scored like 475 points or 470 points or more. Last 2 out of 3 years, he's thrown 36 and 37 touchdowns. And when you pair him with an upside of Caleb Williams, I'm cool with that. I'll ride with that team. And the one value, I just don't get how Debo goes at the 3-4 turn. I know my partner in a lot of leagues, Jason Anthony, he's doing a slow main right now, and Debo just went at 4-6. I just can't comprehend that.
All right, sounds good. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, that stuck out to me too with Team 4. I just don't think you could get by on a wide receiver room of, I know the the format is different here, but you start off with 4 running backs. I would have skipped Alvin Kamara there and hit on an Amari Cooper or Zay Flowers, get my wide receiver room going a little bit quicker than this particular drafter did. Lad McConkey as your 2 and Jamison Williams as your 3. If Deontay Johnson ever misses time as his 1, you're in big trouble for the season, I believe. So that team stuck out to me as a draft strategy and build that I wasn't crazy about. Let's head over to team 7, the Bijan Robinson team. This is the team that stuck out to me as a big winner. I like this build. In the FFPC format here, you start off, you get Bijan at 7, so you lock in your big time RB1. You come back with 2 big time wide receivers in Puka and Waddle, and then you still clip a target monster at the tight end position in this format, and Evan Ingram in the 4th round. You still are able to come back and get Zay Flowers and Calvin Ridley, 2 wide receiver 1s on their respective teams. Now your wide receiver room is looking pretty good and complete. You get a running quarterback in Anthony Richardson in round 7 to help in this format, which is 4-point passing quarterback. So those rushing quarterbacks are always a bonus to me in those types of leagues. And then you come back and you get great value in Tony Pollard and Jerome Ford with Nick Chubb going on pup, like I think we all assumed, at least I did. Now you got 2 solid running backs to go to. So I love that build. I love that team. And I also like the team right next to it, the A.J. Brown team, getting an elite tight end in Laporta. You get 2 big-time running backs in Pacheco and Cook in the 3rd and 4th. You get a running quarterback with Jalen Hurts in the 5th. 2 solid receivers in Godwin and Watson. And you complete your running back room with DeAndre Swift in the 8th. So right there in the middle, I think we're seeing in a lot of drafts that sweet spot right now is round 6, is picks 6 through 9 in that first round. It's easy living right there. So I'll turn it over to Nelson to see what he saw on this board. But those are the 3 teams that stuck out to me: good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah, I think in FFPC, what you see is a lot of extreme builds. And I think you even see like good players, good fantasy players will kind of get stuck with the tight end premium. And you'll have some like ugly builds that I just don't think the structure and the players they're taking and where they're taking them is going to work for an overall. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to beat quite a few teams to win the $1 million. So I look at it as you don't have to have a spectacular draft because if you look back at the main event winner last year and you look at his draft board, there was nothing special about it really. Like nothing stuck out to me like, oh my goodness, this guy, just got value after value. So I'm not looking for, like, you don't have to hit a home run with every single pick. I think you just got to be solid and you got to find, 1 or 2 breakout players in your structure. In this particular draft, I was in this draft. I thought that everyone was pretty much solid. I didn't see anyone get crazy. You'll see that like the tight ends, for example, were spread out amongst all the teams. That's usually like a sign of like a pretty sharp room when that happens. Just my preference, my opinion, but I don't like when you start off with like a Laporta or a Kelsey or Kincaid in the 2nd round, and then like you take like George Kittle and you take Mark Andrews and then you take, Brock Bowers. I just think that when you're spending those premium picks on several of those tight ends, you need those tight ends basically to, be like top 3, top 4 in scoring in order for that to work out, because now you're leaving yourself vulnerable at wide receiver or another position. So with this particular draft, like Maddie had pointed out, in terms of draft structure, again, I don't agree with all the players that team 2 took, but that's how you kind of build a team. And that's my preference, is to structure the team that way. I think team 1 was onto something, and I agree with Maddie that Zamir White was not the pick there. It had to be Brock Bowers. And on the 8-9 turn, I'm a Tajay Spears fan, but if you're going to take Brooks, I actually think that the way you get out of the gate with that particular structure and that team is going forward with Brooks, because I think what it does is it gets you out of the gate with Jerome Ford, who right now, unless, we have some crazy like signings, in Cleveland or whatever at running back, Ford looks like he's going to be the guy for the first 4 weeks. And then with Brooks, he's starting on the pup. So I think they complement each other a little bit better. I think Spears has a ton of upside, but he's sharing the backfield with Pollard to start the year. So that's kind of like my preference of how I would have built that team. The Bijan team, I agree with Chris also. Pretty good structure. I like some of the players that they took. So that's kind of what, I had noted. Nothing really stuck out to me. Team 4, I don't like doing that type of build because you really have to thread the needle with those running backs. Those guys need to be, top 6 running backs in order for that structure to work out. Brees, ETN, 100%. I can definitely see it where those guys could be like top 3 running backs. I don't think it's out of the range of outcomes. Rashad White, although solid, I don't think that's like really who he is. And Kamara, I just think that like he's past his prime. And although solid, I don't look at it as like he's not really a guy that I'm looking to take as like my 4th running back, put him in the flex. I much rather have a wide receiver because now with Team 4, he's dependent on Deontay and McConkey, and then the rest of those wide receivers, trying to find 2 of them that are going to be dependable week in, week out. And the wide receivers, as you get later in the draft, yes, you can find some gems, but it becomes a lot harder. So that's what stuck out to me, guys.
Now, let me jump in real quick with that. The Laporta comment, Nelson. When you say, I know you don't like the build of getting Laporta early, but in the FFPC format, if that particular drafter there in the 7-hole passes on a tight end there, he knows he's giving up McBride, Kincaid, Kelsey, and Laporta probably, correct?
Oh, 100%. So just to reiterate, I'm not saying that taking Laporta or taking a tight end early is a bad thing. I actually think in FFPC this year, that is my strategy. My strategy is to go with one of those high volume tight ends in the 2nd round. So after reviewing boards, I'm saying more, if you take Laporta, I don't think that team should be taking Mark Andrews there. And I don't think that team should be taking Evan Ingram there. I'm just saying that I've seen those type of builds, and those tight ends are, great, but I don't like, putting all those tight ends in my flex, because I think one tight end to play in the tight end position is good, but I think multiple tight ends, again, you really need to, those guys need to be like top tight ends in order for that strategy to work out. But I 100% this year in FFPC, that's where I'm going. I'm doing a few main events with my buddy Dave Hubbard, and we're also doing the 3 high society leagues. So those are 10K buy-ins, and that's basically going to be, my strategy is to get one of those earlier tight ends. I don't want to be chasing it later in the draft.
Yeah, I gotcha. Makes sense.
Yep. Totally makes sense. I think everybody kind of hit on Team 4 is a tough build. I mean, if I'm building that way, I do agree that it's a thin path to success. What he could have done to help himself a lot is in the 8th round, instead of taking Jameson Williams, take DeAndre Hopkins, because then at least you've got a couple of adults in the room at wide receiver with Deontay Johnson in the 6th and Hopkins in the 8th. And then I think the construction looks a little bit better, but still, there's an awful lot of reliance on those top 4 running backs. The other thing I noticed on this particular board was, teams 11 and 12, just kind of slightly different approaches that they had. I like Team 12's approach a lot better than Team 11. I'm not a fan at the back end of the draft of going 2 running backs, Taylor and Barkley, because it really kind of puts you behind the 8-ball at wide receiver and or tight end. If you're doing that, you're gonna be short at one of the two, maybe both. And then you're really relying on those 2 running backs to stay healthy the whole time. Now, if that does happen, then you might be all right. But I prefer doing something like what Team 12 did. So Team 12 took Gibbs in the first and then took 4 straight wide receivers: Drake London, Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, George Pickens. I think that's a much better way to go about it. You kind of give yourself some more outs, because then they come back and they're taking James Conner, Raheem Mostert, and Javonte Williams as their next 3 players. So now you've got 4 running backs, 4 wide receivers. To me back here, sometimes the elite tight end doesn't make sense, just because you're kind of either behind the 8-ball at running back or behind the 8-ball wide receiver on the back end of these FFPC drafts. So if you can make your running back, wide receivers both strong positions for you, you can kind of put it together at tight end a little bit. You can certainly grab enough late round quarterbacks. He took Burrow in the 9th. He missed out on Jaden Daniels by 1 pick, but still Dak Prescott, guys like that were available as well. So I just like the build of 12 better than 11, which is because to me that's sort of a tough spot to be in, as 11 and 12 holes. How do you guys feel about those holes at all?
I just wanted to say something real quick looking at this board, and when you think about it this year, the build out of the 1 hole and the 12 hole are actually pretty similar if you think about it, right? You're out of the 1 hole, you see, all right, you start off with your elite running back a lot of times in McCaffrey, then you're hitting all yellow. And then in the 12 hole, you're trying to grab either Taylor, Barkley, or Gibbs a lot of times. And then you're kind of up against the fence where you have to go yellow for the next 3 or 4 rounds also, so you don't fall behind in the wide receiver room. So, and if you look at this board, they pretty much built the teams out the same exact way. So just an observation that this year in drafts 1 and 12, you're pretty much building it the same way as the more popular build.
Yeah, it's a good point, Chris. Okay, and so now we're all curious. Nelson, this was your board. Which team was Team Nelson?
I was the AJ Brown team.
So teammate.
That's funny. All right, there you go.
Yep, that's nice. Yeah, that's and there's a team that's just very balanced in construction. Because the other thing is about the FFPC with the double flex and only needing to start 2 wide receivers, there are a variety of ways you can go about your construction. And this is one nice way to go at it, where he's got kind of all his bases covered on all 4 positions.
I love that you stacked the Philly. It was like an under the radar Philly stack there, Nelson. With once you get AJ Brown, you didn't have to pay a big price for Jalen Hurts. You get that hookup, and then later on you get your second tight end that a lot of people are hating on Dallas Goedert this year. But what's the hate here? He goes outside of the top 10 tight ends in any format in high stakes. He's the third option in the pass game. And if either Brown or Devonta Smith misses time, he's going to take a huge step up in that role there. You get him as your second tight end in a tight end premium format. So, I like it a lot there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair price for him. And I've noticed that in the earlier drafts, he was going much earlier. And now, like you said, it seems like people are down on him, and he's going a little bit later. So in a tight end premium format, I think 9th round is very fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like Goddard in the 9th. When he was going around earlier, he was going in like the 7th round. It was a lot tougher to hit that button, but in the 9th round, Goddard starts to make a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah. Matty Mo, what's your tight end strategy in FFPC this year? You an early guy if it presents itself to you? Or you like to hold off and aim for that Bowers range with Bowers and Njoku, guys like that, Ferguson? You're trying to clip one of those? How are you treating FFPC drafts?
I'm definitely trying to get one in the 2nd or 3rd round. I think Trey McBride and Kyle Pitts are probably my 2 top targets, or at least what I've drafted so far. But I do love Bowers. And I would go Bowers if he's there like in the 6th round, early 6th, depending upon where I'm picking. to pair him with that, I think that's fantastic, because I think this kid is pretty much one of the best generational talents we've seen. The only discount the reason we're getting the discount is because it's the tight end position. But I mean, just a phenomenal college career. And I really think you just have to come out with one of the tight ends. And Bowers and Njoku are usually the last of that tier. So I think it's imperative that you have one of those guys, at least in the first 5 or 6 rounds.
Yeah, I noticed. I know you're big on Bowers. Nelson, I also noticed in your rankings, you're probably one of the higher on Bowers as well. But in terms of Bowers, do you not look at that offense as, all right, I know they want to be run heavy, and where does Bowers rank in the pecking order here? I listen, we all love Bowers as an extreme talent. I watched him since the day he got to Georgia, and I couldn't wait to draft him. But I think as a consensus, we all were like, oh, he landed in like not the friendliest place for us fantasy wise. He comes off the board after pick 100 all summer long. And now as we're getting towards these big drafts, he's sneaking up more and more based on the talent. But what are we doing here with this Raiders offense? I mean, you got Devontae Adams as a target hog. You got a solid wide receiver too in Jacoby Myers that proved himself last year as one of the top wide receiver twos in an offense. And now you have Bowers fighting with Michael Mayer still, who's a solid tight end. So what kind of production do we see for a Brock Bowers? And are we overrating him now just based on talent? Because a lot of times it's more of what kind of role does the guy play on a particular team fantasy-wise? How many targets can we actually see him getting on a weekly basis to expect him, to produce as a tight end one for us?
Yeah, I think the Raiders actually could be one of those like sneaky offenses that surprise people. I think a lot of people are down on them, and it really comes down to what Minshew can do. And I think we've seen spurts where Minshew is a capable quarterback and can make an offense work. So I'm looking at it as this. I think teams are going to gear up to stop Adams. I think that's going to be their number one priority. I think Jacoby Myers is a solid wide receiver, but when you really look at it realistically, when you compare Myers to Bowers, there is no comparison in terms of talent. So my rankings on Bowers and where I'm willing to take him in drafts is based on, I'm betting on the talent. And I'm looking at it as talent eventually wins out. So I'm looking at it as like he's eventually going to be the number 2 in that pecking order. And that's not to say like Adams right now is not happy with that team. He, from what I know, he's not even practicing. Like he doesn't practice. So I don't know if you guys know that, but like it's just that, I don't give a fuck attitude that he's got right now. And who knows, like he could get shipped out at any point. And then what happens? Like Bowers now he's like the number 1 target earner on the team. So got to see how things play out. But I agree, Chris, if you want to, to play devil's advocate, it does seem like a crowded room on a less than, stellar offense. But I think they're kind of sneaky. I think that they could be decent, even though I'm not high on Zamir White. I don't like where he's going in drafts. I think it's just going to be like just a committee, and it's not going to be worth really targeting those guys. But I think the pass catchers could be decent.
I think everybody's got Kincaid and Laporta on their brain still in terms of, Bowers last year. And, I think when you're drafting Brock Bowers, you're hoping that you get 2023 Laporta, and I don't know if this offense is going to allow it to happen, but I think Bowers can potentially be the same guy as Dalton Kincaid, where weeks last year he was falling, where is he? He's not going to be what we thought that, he's a first round pick. Where's Kincaid? And then we go into the second year of Brock Bowers and the offense is based around him. And now the Raiders' plan long-term was, all right, we're going to build around Brock Bowers. And next year we're going to be drafting Bowers in the 3rd round of drafts. So, that's always in my mind with Bowers. Yeah, Matt, what do you got?
I mean, for me, I think he's going to be second in targets in this team. they've already said he's better than advertised. They drafted him high. And I'll put the over-under at 2.5 rushing touchdowns. We already saw him in the backfield on one play when they were right around the red zone or inside the red zone week 1 of the preseason. So I'm just over the moon for this guy. Maybe I'm wrong. I think he's a cheat code, but we'll see how it plays out. I compare him more this year to a Trey McBride, and maybe it takes a couple of weeks, and then you see it launch off because the athleticism is there. What like a Trey McBride, and they are going to need his tools in order to compete. You go up against the Chiefs and stuff like that. In order to be in order to keep up, Bowers is going to have to come through.
Yeah, and I think this is an area of the draft where he fits really well because you're talking about the late 6th, early 7th. It's kind of what I call the bet on talent area. You got guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers, Zamir White is a little bit of a bet on not necessarily talent, but just situation. Christian Watson, Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman, this is kind of where all those players are fitting in, is in the 6th and 7th round. And I think Bowers is a good fit in there. So to me, he's appropriately priced right now. If he moves up anymore, that's probably going to take me off of him. But right now, I don't mind the price at all. But anyway, we were talking briefly, at least, about under the radar offenses. And the Raiders were mentioned as one of those under the radar offenses. So we're gonna take a quick break here, do a quick little ad, and then we'll come right back, and we're going to talk about some of those under the radar offenses.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
All right, and we are back. So we want to talk a little bit about under the radar offenses, because as all of us go through our drafts, there's usually an offense or two that we kind of gravitate towards that has a lot of late round players available, or at least mid to late round players. So what I want to find out from you guys is give us each one offense that you think has several undervalued players. Let us know why you feel like they're undervalued, and who specifically do you feel are the best values on the team. So let's start off with Chris on that. Chris, what do you have for under the radar offenses?
Well, I'll tell you what, Raiders were definitely going to be one of the top selections of mine. I don't understand the whole Raiders offense in general. Once Minshew took over, I really started buying into the offense as a whole. But for today's discussion, my offense that I'm loving buying in on for a big breakout is the Carolina Panthers. I'm into them across the board, and I really can't understand starting at the top with Bryce Young. Bryce Young basically goes undrafted. I'm going to bet on this kid as a QB2 late in a lot of my drafts as an under-the-radar quarterback. I think Canales can come in and do a lot with this. I think we can wipe the slate clean with him coming into year 2. I think that he gets a pass in year 1. Maybe he was a little in over his head. Comes in, he gets an elite option in Deontay Johnson. They draft a wide receiver in round 1, and Xavier Legette, who I absolutely loved in college. I think give him maybe September, early October, and he can really establish himself as a wide receiver 2 in this league. And once Jonathan Brooks comes off of PUP, I think this offense goes from an offense that most people forget about and view as probably a bottom 5 or 6 offense to probably one of those that teams that could take a huge jump like the Texans did last year and finish as a top 12 offense out of nowhere. So I don't know why it's so under the radar across the board, but that's one of the offenses that I'm buying into. And Xavier Legette, like I said, is someone that I try and pick off early in those middle rounds as someone that I can hopefully use in November and December in my starting lineups as a breakout star.
All right, Nelson, what do you got?
My team, it's not as under the radar as Chris's. I kind of like that Carolina pick because other than maybe a little bit of Deontay Johnson, I'm really not on that offense. So I got to kind of wrap my head around that if Chris is mentioning them. But my team is the Green Bay Packers. So when I look at it, like that whole offense just kind of goes semi-cheap. I think Jacobs, mid fourth round, most expensive guy, but he looks like he might be primed for like a huge workload based on Lloyd starting off on the pup. AJ Dillon, I think we already know like what Dillon is, even though he will get some touches and some carries. But you look at where Jordan Love goes, he goes outside like the top quarterbacks. So like, Lamar, Stroud, go before him. And then you have the receivers. So like the pass catchers, Watson, Reed, Dobbs, and Dontavian Wicks. Wicks actually for like a number 4 goes a little bit early in drafts. I think people are betting on that, that upside. But overall, like you can get pieces to this offense at a really fair price. And that's kind of like the team that I've been targeting and building a lot of my teams. Like I love Watson this year. So it just seems like I'm the only guy in the room when I'm in the draft that is like high on Watson, because when I pass on him, just because I have so much of Watson, I force myself to pass on him, and he just drops. Like he's not really a guy that people are taking. So it kind of made me realize that like maybe I'm overdrafting Watson, and I can get even better deals on him. Dobbs, like he's a guy that's like a favorite of Jordan Love's go-to guy. And, he's just a forgotten guy. People don't really, target him. He's just there like 10th round in drafts. So Musgrave, tight end, especially like here in the FFPC, tight end premium. I think like, yeah, that's my opinion is. And then like, if one of those guys get injured, I think Wicks has shown already like the upside that he has. He's just a playmaker. So like you can get a piece of like a very good offense. Love was, I believe, top 10 in QB scoring last year. So like you have a guy I think that could like go to another level, especially with like the weapons and the offense that he's in.
Interesting. And I'm curious, Nelson, do you have any concerns about how spread out that passing attack might be, like being able to decide and manage leagues here? Which wide receivers or tight ends are going to be going off on any given week, or do you feel like that's pretty much baked into the price?
I think it's baked into the price. I think it's the unknown. That's why, these guys are going where they're going. And the only guy that I have a little bit of concern of is Jaden Reed. And that's just like, if he gets pushed up in drafts, I'm concerned because I believe he's the number 3 wide receiver on the team, and he's not going to get full snaps, but when he's out there on the field, he's going to earn targets. He's going to get targets. So I don't mind. I want to draft Reed, but I want to get a little bit of a discount. And it seems like someone's always willing to kind of fire him up a little bit earlier than where I want to take him. And as far as Watson kind of already, he's shown us what he's capable of. He's got huge upside. If he has the hamstring things, the injury figured out and that's behind him, he's shown that he has like that ability where, you look and he's got 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards in a game. So he's done it. So I look at it as if he's put it on film and it was multiple times, then I think that's who the player is. He just has to stay healthy.
I think Watson is one of those, great reminders of, in the offseason, people are so off of him, of how he got burned, how they got burned by him. And then, draft start early in the summer, and his ADP was like 70s, 80s. Nobody was touching him because they were burnt. And we see it every year with certain plays. The market never readjusts correctly to move him up to where he should be going. And people are like, all right, we moved him up enough now. Now he's a 6th rounder in most high stakes drafts this year. And like, all right, we can't move him up anymore. What are we going to do? Like, take this guy from the 8th in May and bring him all the way up into the 4th? Well, yeah, that's probably where he should be going.
I took him in the 5th.
That's where he was going.
Yeah.
That's where he was going last year.
Yeah, it's just you see this with like a handful of players every year that the market just never readjusts because they see that ADP number at 95 4 months ago, and then it becomes 85, then it becomes 75, and everybody's like, all right, pump the brakes, we moved them up enough. Well, Watson just may be that guy that's just that value no matter where you draft him all summer long.
Yeah, I've been heavily into Watson, so I love the call there. I think that's, it's a great pick at a great price, and again, fits into that range I was talking about, where you're really betting on talent. You have no guarantee on anything, but this is the range where I think kind of some league winners are likely to come from. So Watson fits right in there, and I just want to go back real quick and see if you guys have any pushback on Chris's selection of the Carolina Panthers, because we've got somebody in the chat, Mark Lambert, who definitely is pushing back. He's calling them the stairway to heaven of 2024 as far as guitar stores go. The Carolina Panthers. Do you guys think that Chris is off base here on the Panthers, or is this an offense that you guys are buying into as well?
I'm buying into it. Yeah, I mean, I think just inserting the new head coach, I think this is a team that was humiliated last year. The owner is a very prideful man. Whether you think he's a moron or not, he's a very successful guy. And that's why I'm still a big believer in Jonathan Brooks. If you set your team up right, and because I think the second half of the year, you have to basically say, the first 6-8 weeks, I'm probably not going to have Jonathan Brooks. But I keep hearing on Twitter and on podcasts, well, they're not really going to unleash Jonathan Brooks. They're going to save him. This is one team I think is going to fight hardest in those weeks 14, 15, 16, 17 to win as many games as possible. They won one game last year. They drafted Young, and C.J. Stroud was like the second coming. So I don't buy any of that. I think the head coach was a great selection. They drafted a running back who was injured, but is kind of like Bijan Light. And if I can get that guy in the early 9th round, even as my RB2, I'll fill in the other running backs. I'm going to take that shot because I feel I can build a good enough team up to that point, fill it in, and then I can make that run in the second half. So I agree with Chris. I mean, as far as Nelson said with the Packers, I think the Packers are a smash. A guy like Wicks, he's such a great contingent player. Because if any of those guys, look, I love Jaden Reed, and I have a ton of Jaden Reed, but I've seen how the market's corrected, and you have to be playing the market. Like, I can take Watson now, and I can still get Reed. And I don't mind pairing those two guys on an offense I think is really good. So that's just to piggyback what those guys said.
All right. Yeah, definitely.
Matt, who's your under-the-radar offense? You didn't tell us.
Well, yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
To go yet.
Oh, all right.
I had to circle back to yours, Chris, after you got kind of hung out to dry on the chat there. So, I felt like we needed to get back to that one. And just
under the radar offenses. So
exactly.
That's about as under the radar as you could get.
I mean, spoiler alert, it was one of the things that the chat mentioned that was just mentioned in that message. So
Yep. And my guy on that offense, I like Deontay Johnson because I think it doesn't matter whether they're ahead or behind. He's going to get fed. I think this offense is, Bryce Young is much better than what we saw last year. I think we have, some adults in the room running the show here. We've got some help on the offensive line. We've got some help in the wide receiver room. It should be a better offense and just a better scheme in general. So I don't think it's a bad one to buy into at all. But Matt, why don't you tell us who's your under the radar offense here?
I went with the Denver Broncos here. I think Sean Payton got his field general in Bo Nix. I think he's a guy that can operate the offense that Payton wants to implement. And if you start zero running back and you can get a Javonte Williams at the end of the second, early eighth, I'm doing a slow main FFPC where I started out with 5 receivers and a tight end. End of the 7th round, I just wasn't passing on CJ Stroud. It was between him and Javonte. My consolation prize after taking Stroud was Chase Brown, and I love that. So, but here's the thing. You can get Javonte to be your RB1 if you wait that long. That's number one. Jaleel McLaughlin is the biggest winner of Samaje Perine getting cut. He is basically the Darren Sproles in this offense, and I believe under Peyton, Darren Sproles was like RB5, RB10 or 13, and RB24. So he's in a fantastic role. The kids work as hard as possible to gain everybody's trust. He was terrible in the pass blocking last year. And also what happens here is I don't know who that wide receiver 2 is. Marvin Mims gets some life here. I didn't see them cutting Tim Patrick. It sounds like if you listen to Benjamin Albright, that Troy Franklin has like no shot this year. He's pretty much dead. But, if they're cutting Tim Patrick, maybe in the second half, he appears and can really help out. And even Greg Dulcich, who we all really liked, and in college at UCLA, was a phenomenal pass-catching tight end. He really can't block, but he's a phenomenal pass-catching tight end. So I kind of see this offense, just with the Sean Payton running backs. I mean, I've seen tweets where if you go back to the Obama's first administration, he basically has a top 5 running back room. Now, you want it to be 2 guys. Estimate needs to be that 3rd guy who's really not involved and is the contingent injury guy that gets inserted in there if something was to happen. And I think I saw late round quarterback tweeted 8 of the top 17 running back rooms are all on the Sean Payton. They're going to catch a bunch of balls, and the guy and all of Samaje Perine's targets are now gone. So these guys will benefit. So that's why I chose the Denver Broncos.
Nice. And I like the fact that you took them because I had them as one of my 2 choices. I knew since I was going last, I probably better have a couple of them lined up here. But I think you lined out the case very well. A couple things I want to put in on that is, Audric Estime he's a great handcuff. I don't think he's going to have a huge role to start with. And while we're not a dynasty show, I will tell you this: if you're in dynasty, you probably want to grab him for next year because Javonte Williams will be a free agent after this coming year. So I think Estime is going to be a nice player to own next year. But for this year,
Dan, I just want to piggyback off of that because I like what Maddie was saying. And Javonte Williams was actually a guy that just recently came onto my radar. I had faded him last year, coming off the ACL surgery. I usually don't like taking running backs their first year back. I just think that they need a full year plus to get back to their usual explosion and cutting ability. But this year, with the lost weight and the motivation that he has and the offense that he's in and what he's capable of, because he's fully capable of catching passes. So I don't necessarily think like McLaughlin's, just like a foregone conclusion that he's just going to be the passing down and 3rd down back. I think Javonte also could handle that workload. So he's definitely entered my thought process in that like 7th, 8th round. I think there's about a half a dozen running backs that you could make a case for that legitimately could be top 10 running backs this year. It happened last year. Look at where Rashad White and Pacheco were going in drafts last year. And I think that there's guys with, similar situations and skill set that are going that range. And Javonte is definitely a guy that, again, with him being motivated and, he's going to be a free agent and everything. I could see where like next year we're talking about him as like a top, 3-round pick.
Yep, definitely. Chris, any thoughts?
No, on Javonte, I agree with Nelson. I'm actually in the same boat. I wanted to wait and see. He was one of those guys. I think we all do it. We like, we don't know if we're in on a player. We don't know if we're out on it. We need more info. We want to see him hit the field. I think I said it in last week's episode. I was watching the Denver preseason game, passed the eye test for me, so he came back into my draft plans. I think what we're seeing is those 8th-round running backs that were all going about a month ago, Javonte being in that group that Nelson's talking about, those 4 to 6 running backs. They were always that comforting landing spot as your RB3 or in a strong wide receiver room. You come back, you hit that late 7th round, early 8th round, and you pick off one of those guys as your RB2 to complete the build. But we're seeing those guys are moving up an extra round and a half now. They're all getting hot names. Everybody's in on DeAndre Swift, it seems like. Tony Pollard's getting some buzz, Javonte Williams. And I don't know if any of these guys make it to, that 80 number anymore in drafts as we hit these final 2 weeks. So you're going to have to pay a price for these guys that were going in that 8th round.
Yep, definitely. All right, and then for my under-the-radar offense, I'm going to go with the Chargers. I think this is an offense that, it's in transition, no doubt. And a lot of what's going on here is we have some uncertain situations, so it's pushing down the prices for everybody. It seems like fantasy is definitely out on Justin Herbert as being a top quarterback anymore. Just due to the fact that he lost his top 2 weapons plus Eckler in the receiving game. But I think Herbert is probably a good enough quarterback that he's got good enough weapons right now that as a passer, he's going to be just fine. And as a runner in this Greg Roman offense, this is going to be something that Herbert, he's an underrated athlete. So I think he's going to be running a little bit more than everybody expects. We have seen him put some touchdowns in on the ground before. I think it was in his rookie year, or maybe it was his second year, but he has scored on the ground before. I think that's something that's likely to happen again. So I think he's kind of sneaky underrated. I don't see him as being, like a top 8 quarterback or whatever, but I see him as definitely being better than where he's being drafted. And then the running back room, you've got Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins at the 10-11 turn, and Vidal at in the 13th. And I think, my favorite way to play it is just, to try to grab Dobbins and Vidal because I'm just going to bet against Gus. I don't think, Gus really has the juice. Dobbins, he's a guy that you draft, because he's there for a good time, not for a long time. We expect the clock to run out on him at some point this year. But as long as he's, not on the injured reserve list, he's a really great running back. And then Vidal, I think, is going to be the guy who kind of pulls into his place. So that's my favorite way to play that. You can definitely grab the receivers here. I've probably done a little bit less of grabbing the receivers than the other pieces. McConkey in the 8th, Palmer in the 10th. I mean, those are certainly acceptable prices. But it's overall a pretty cheap offense. And I think with Harbaugh and Greg Roman, they're going to score some points. I don't think they're going to be a hugely explosive offense, but I think there's sneaky fantasy points to be had here. What do you guys think?
Dan, I actually agree with a lot what you were saying. And I think Dobbins this year is just a fantastic pick. On the point, you're basically spending an 11th round pick. The guy, even on one leg, was pretty damn good. He's looked great. They're saying he's good to go. He's got Gus Edwards and a rookie 6th round pick, who I like. But if he gets hurt, you cut him. You're not putting, after the 10th round, I really don't care as much as with ADP. I mean, I'm not going to try and draft somebody 4 rounds ahead, but I'm going to fill out my team. And I think it's just a great upside shot. And I also like taking him and taking Vidal, because I think you're betting against Gus, as you said, and you're getting 2 solid pieces because Harbaugh's going to run the ball. Roman knows him, loves him, and they're going to give him every opportunity. So I really like that call.
All right, Nelson, Chris, anything to add?
Well, this is the part of the show where we're going to disagree, because I just think that Dobbins is damaged goods. I think that an Achilles injury is pretty much a nail in the coffin for a running back. The only guy really that we've seen come back from that is Deontay Foreman, which is crazy. I can't believe that he's still performing at a decent level. But yeah, for the most part, I think, especially that it's not like it's like 2 years removed from the injury, like a Cam Akers, for example. You saw after that Achilles, that sapped all of his explosiveness, and then when he gets in the open field, he's not going to be able to run away from guys. So for me, I like Gus Edwards. I think his price where he goes kind of gives you that like sneaky running back that you're not paying really an expensive price for him, and he could be the lead back for a while. And then Vidal is the guy that I think could be like the second half guy. So I'd be targeting him more. But like overall, I'm not a huge fan of this offense. Like I think Herbert is very talented, but I don't like the wide receiver room. I actually don't think Josh Palmer is very good. So I know I'm going to roll off, on a tangent here, but Ladd McConkey, I think he's going to struggle his first year in the NFL. I think he's getting overdrafted in fantasy drafts right now. I think there's, better wide receivers to be had. So I just think that room they're going to struggle. I think, it's going to be an offense that's going to struggle to move the ball. So that's why.
Well, let me disagree with both of you then. Dan, let me hit you up. I'm out on the Chargers offense. I don't see any upside for Herbert. Like if I'm drafting a quarterback, I need some potential that he could give me 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I don't see any way. I know they want to run the ball a ton and everything, but with Herbert, they're not going to completely take the ball out of his hands. You don't give a guy $50 million and pay him like an elite QB1, take him out of his hands. Who I do think is going to benefit greatly is Ladd McConkey. So that's where I'll completely disagree with Nelson. I'm in on McConkey. I think he can be a PPR monster right out of the bat. And that's a bet against everyone else in the wide receiver room or tight end room there for the Chargers. I think they knew what they were getting with this kid. He's a phenomenal route runner. I think the price is a little depressed now because he's been banged up in camp, but all the beat reporters that first week when they were together, Herbert and Ladd McConkey, they were making sweet music out there. And beat reporters said, hey, he's the clear wide receiver 1, which I expected him to be. So do I love this offense? No, they're not an under the radar offense for me at all. But if you want one of those, nice wide receiver 5s late in that 8th, 9th round range, I think McConkey could rack up the PPR points for you.
One last thing on this, and then we can move on. I think the addition of Joe Alt, who seems to be moving mountains, and just watching the preseason, I know it's preseason. I think a lot of people get fooled by preseason, but I think this offensive line, the tight ends are working. They are creating yards before contact. You see Vidal, and look, everything. I've watched so many videos on Dobbins. I've listened to everything on him. I'm willing to take that shot. I think this run game, when you have a Harbaugh and a Greg Roman, is worth the shot past the 10th round. Whether you like Gus, whether you're a Dobbins or a Vidal guy, I think you got to take a shot on at least one of them.
Yeah, so I think the two of us are on Dobbins, and 2 of us are on more Edwards over Dobbins with me and Nelson. I'll say this: do I love Edwards? No, but I think he's a safe 65 rushing yards and a touchdown type of running back that you could put on your team as your RB4 stick him in there as your flex or your desperation RB2 in certain weeks that look, favorable for him. I think he's going to get his 15 carries for 70 rushing yards. And when he falls into the end zone inside the 5, you got yourself a nice almost 15-point play, running back there with Gus. So it's Gus over Dobbins for me because I'm betting against that injury again with Dobbins.
Yeah, I think Gus definitely fits if you've got a 0 running back going and you just, you want some solid early season points. Dobbins is a little bit more shoot for the moon. And, for me, Vidal is the way I've been playing this offense the most, just because he's so cheap and, he's somebody I can just kind of leave stashed on my bench as long as I need to. So that's been my favorite way to play it. All right, let's move on and talk about some tough draft slots around. All of us, we've been doing a lot of drafting over the past month, and especially over the last couple of weeks. Things are starting to ramp up more and more, and it's starting to become more obvious to me anyway, and I'm sure to you guys. Where are the places in the draft where you kind of feel like you're struggling, and that can be either a particular draft slot, like, you hate the 11 or you hate the 8 or whatever, or it can also be particular rounds where you're just having trouble finding value. So Nelson, you want to kick us off on that discussion?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't mean to out you, Chris. I didn't even ask you if this is okay, but I'm going to say it anyway. So we got our draft slots over at FFC for the New York prime times, right? And I'm looking through the KDS, right? So you at NFFC you can choose your draft preference where you want to slot. And I'm looking, and I go down and I see Chris as like his third preference 12 hole, and I'm like, what the fuck is he gonna do with For me personally, I hate pick 11 and 12. I think there's like a top 10 group of guys that I want, and then I just think it falls off. And I don't love the running backs back there necessarily. I don't mind Gibbs. I think there's a couple of receivers I like, but nothing that I love. So like I want kind of like one of those earlier to mid-round, first-round spots. So when I saw Chris with like his number 3 draft preference, I texted him right away, and I said, "What do you got planned back there?" Because I know that's not 12 is definitely not up there in my top 5. So I would say for this topic that I just don't want to be in 10. 11, 12 range. I had a prime time last night where somehow I ended up with 11, and it was my 11th, preference. So just kind of the luck of the draw. And I didn't love the team. I didn't like how I was starting off the draft with those guys. But I think, a league can be won from anywhere. It's about picking the right guys at the end of the day. So I'm sure Chris will have like a plan of what he wants to do there and everything, but that would be like my opinion is I hate the back end this year.
Yeah. It seems, and Nelson, just to follow up real quick, I agree. 11 and 12 are definitely most high stakes drafters' last 2 preferences this year, because there is that locked in 10 before that wide receiver cliff falls off. No doubt about that. But I guess we'll see in New York what my plan is.
I know you ain't going running back.
So there's no teasers here, huh? No teasers at all?
I mean,
you know what? Listen, a lot of it is, you got to understand in NFFC draft. Well, first off, the reason why I did that, guys, I've had a bunch of high stakes drafts the last 10 days. I've gotten 1 through 7 in every single one of them. Then all the New York draft selections come out. I got all, again, top 7. And I knew it was my last draft of the weekend. So as soon as I got that last draft, I said, wow, I don't have any picks from 8 to 12. Let me try and get in. And Nelson, I put myself 8, 9, and then 12. And I didn't get the 8th or 9th pick. So I got the 12th pick. That's just to follow up your question. But yeah, I got a plan out of that 12-hole, buddy.
Okay.
To be continued.
Somehow I suspected you might have a plan from there.
Next Tuesday, we'll be reviewing that New York live draft board.
Oh, no doubt.
In the 12 hole.
That'll be a good one for sure.
And I know that Nelson is drafting on Saturday out of the 1 hole, and I'm out of the 2 hole next to him. So that'll be a fun little battle. I'm looking forward to, early in the draft too. But really looking forward to all the New York drafts. But God, I'm sorry. Back to our topic at hand.
All right. For me, to me, it's kind of the same this year as it seems to be a lot of years. I feel like the 2nd through 5th rounds is filled with landmines. And, especially at wide receiver and running back, I just feel like there are too many players that we're too high on. Some of these guys are not going to come through. It's not necessarily easy to parse out exactly which of those guys they are. I'm uneasy about, exactly how much James Cook is going to be impacted by Ray Davis, or I'm uneasy about, is Jalen Waddle going to be like, Jalen Waddle of 2 years ago or Jalen Waddle of last year? So you can't totally ignore them. But on the other hand, to me, the tight ends, especially in FFPC, provide a lot of safety in that range. And also those elite quarterbacks are going in like round 5. You got Josh Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, Lamar Jackson. And to me, those are kind of where I find myself gravitating to kind of take some of the pressure off. So I don't feel like I have to, necessarily nail every running back or wide receiver that I draft from rounds 2 through 5. If I can make a couple of those onesie positions at quarterback and tight end, then I feel a little bit better, because then I can start prospecting at the other positions, knowing that I've got one or both of those onesie positions locked down. All right, Matt.
I have 2 NFFC drafts on Saturday. Now, I'm in the central time zone now, living in Nashville, and I kind of screwed this up. I'm doing my bullet, and then I'm doing a prime time. And I was thinking 4 p.m. Eastern for my bullet, which would be 3 p.m. Central Time. And then the 8 o'clock prime time was Eastern. That would be 7 o'clock Central Time. Unfortunately, it's 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So I had 1 hour before the other one starts. So that'll be fun. But
Double screen.
I set my KDS for the silver bullet with 1 first, then 3, 4, then 9. I wanted CeeDee Lamb as my number 1 pick in the bullet. If not, I wanted the hero running back at 3, 4. And if that didn't work, I was hoping to get Garrett Wilson at 9. And I ended up getting the first pick. So I'm going CeeDee Lamb in my bullet. Now, for my prime time, I went 3, 4, and 9. I figured I'll grab a hero running back. I mean, Lamb isn't falling anymore, so I'll grab that. If I didn't get that, again, I'd get Garrett Wilson, but I got number 3. So I have a couple of Bijans. If it falls right, I want to get my first Bryce in a main event or a prime time. I have a bunch of him in like the 350s, but I don't have him in any of those. So yeah, and I just don't like 11 and 12 because I really want 9 to 1, somewhere in that range. 10 is fine, but I'm going to take Garrett Wilson over A.J. Brown. That could be an epic mistake, but I'm a really big Devonta Smith guy this year, especially if he's in the motion, playing in the slot. I really think he's going to break out and have a fantastic season. Last year in a prime time, I think the last one in Vegas, I took Garrett Wilson 3 overall, which ended up being a mistake because Aaron Rodgers went out on the 4th play of the season. But even with the worst quarterback play of maybe all time, he still was putting up 15 points a game. So if he had adequate quarterbacking, I think he gets over 20. So that's my Garrett Wilson love and reasons why.
Yeah, I'll touch on my right now, and it's totally different. It's not about draft slots. I think the toughest decisions for me right now is that end of the 3rd round, straight through the 4th round and early 5th round, prioritizing the wide receivers in that order. We all know like these high stakes drafts are so calculated. The top 33 in ADP go 33 in a row, basically on every draft. Nobody infiltrates the top 33. So if you're in there and you're in that 1 through 4 hole and you get past where, it seems like DK Metcalf and Rashee Rice are now those wide receivers that are ending that cliff in that 33, 34 overall range. Once that turn comes and goes straight through the fifth round, the third through the fourth and midway through the fifth, you have that cluster of 8 to 10 wide receivers pretty much. And we all like most of them. Some like more than others. That's where I've been struggling a little bit in terms of prioritizing those names and finding, and I feel like and I'm saying this, guys, because I feel like it's changed. We had that time, the couple of weeks where Ridley moved up. We had the time where Godwin moved up. Terry McLaurin is a hot name now. He's moved up from like the back end of the fourth to the early fourth. Just all these names of receivers. I'm not going to waste everyone going through them, but for the sake of the topic, that's where I'm, struggling each draft, saying, all right, maybe last night I took this wide receiver. Let me flip it and take this guy here. And they all go all over. You don't know this year. Once you get outside those top 33 picks, all those receivers can go in any which way. It's drafter's preference. And, maybe the listeners at home and maybe you guys are also having some difficulties putting those guys in order. When you're on the clock, who am I going to take out of this group? We might like 5 out of the 8 of them, 2 out of the 8 of them, and we, want to put them in order. But, we're going to be on the clock, 1 minute clocks here in these live drafts coming up soon. And you need to have your shit straight and know exactly who you're clicking on in those rounds right there.
I will say this is a good subject that Chris brings up, and I think it's worth going down this road. I think we extend the show here by a few minutes and talk about this, because this is where, like, for a lot of drafters, it's about when you're on the clock and having to make those decisions. Is where that's kind of like where it's won and lost in terms of your draft. And my thinking right now is that if I start off with 3 wide receivers, that 4th round is going to be a target of mine for James Cook, Jacobs, and Walker. I've identified those are the 3 running backs.
And that's Nelson, that's with a 3 wide receiver start, you said? I'm sorry.
With a 3 wide receiver start.
Gotcha. Yep.
So with a 3 wide receiver start, I've identified those are the 3 backs that I think can return value where they're going, and I'm willing to push them up because I think that their ceiling is much higher than round 4. The next thing that I would do is, whether it's a 3 wide receiver start or like a hero running back type of start, is if I'm on the back end of the 4th round, 5th round, I'm looking at one of those top quarterbacks. So that's where I want to get exposure to Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. Those are my top 2 guys this year. I'm fine with Josh Allen, but I've got those 2 guys ahead of him this year. So that's where I want to go. If I start off with like Brees or Bijan, for example, at running back, I want to now fill out my wide receivers, and especially like at FFPC, if I go tight end in the 2nd round, I'm probably not very often going to take. I'm not going to take a running back in that 4th, 5th round. I'm looking at wide receiver at that point, which is kind of like the draft board that we looked at earlier. I happened to start with AJ Brown. So if it was a running back that I had started with, I would have passed, James Cook at that point in the 4th round. So structure wise, and in terms of like how I'm trying to put the team together, it just depends on where I am in the draft. And that's how I'm going to get exposure to those, specific players.
And I think this is a great topic, guys. So let's, like Nelson said, let's get into it a little more. I think we all want to get our hands on those elite running backs. Everybody wants to get either the elite 3 in the early first round or the second 3 with Gibbs, Taylor, Barkley. Who loves them? But you're sacrificing one of those receivers. And I think right now that's why everyone's in love with that middle of the first round, that 5 through 9 range. Because if you don't get one of the elite 3 running backs and you settle for a Chase, a Monra, Jefferson, whatever, I think Nelson just hit on the 3 or 4 running backs that complete that. You can go 0 RB out of the first 3 rounds. There's great receivers in the second round. There's great receivers in that middle of the third round, right before the cliff kind of falls off. But what are you going to do for your running back room? I don't want to punt my running back room so bad where you see a lot of guys take their RB1 in round 7, 8 and build out a room like that. I personally don't think you can win like that. Okay. You're banking on too much. Listen, I'm not that smart where I'm going to pick this year's Kyron Williams again or Raheem Mostert in rounds 11 and 17. Okay. So I need a base out of my RB room, and I sleep better at night when my RB1 is locked in to 15 plus points. And I know he's getting a ton of touches. So, hitting those guys in round 4, the Jacobs, the Walkers, the James Cooks, the Rashad Whites, I think you need to know ahead of time when you're coming into these drafts, hey, do I only like 1 out of these 4 or 5 running backs? Do I like all 4? Nelson said he likes 3 of those guys. It allows you to go that 0 RB early, because then you could come in and you have options. You have outs where you could start building your RB room in those round 4 or 5 with those guys. So, yeah, it's a great topic right there, Nelson.
I think, as Chris stated, like that 33, 34 is critical. But if you're starting with the 1 pick and you have Lamb and you get that second stud receiver at the end of the second round, at that 3-4 turn, if Rice does fall to you there, he may not. But I still think a guy I'd be comfortable with is like Zay Jones, who's going in the middle of the 4th or later. I think Zay Jones is a beast. You may get a Diggs if you're into that.
Zay Flowers?
Excuse me, Zay Flowers. I said Zay Jones.
Zay Jones is suspended.
Yeah. Zay Flowers, excuse me. But, also, Kenneth Walker would be a guy I would smash at that if I wanted to get that, 3 wide, the 1 running back. And, it will set you up. That 5-6 turn, you probably have a shot at a good tight end and a good quarterback. So you're not in much danger there.
Yeah, Matt, I agree with you. I think out of the 1 hole, the easier build is actually Lamb instead of McCaffrey. I'll agree with that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm curious how you guys are handling the tight end specifically then in the NFFC, because you're looking at basically rounds 4 and 5 are where the top 5 tight ends go off roughly. You're talking Kelsey, Laporta, McBride, Kincaid, and probably Andrews are gone by the end of the 5th round. Are you guys delving into that tier at all, or is the way that you're building precluding you from doing that?
For me, I'm probably waiting a little, because if Kyle Pitts or an Ingram are there in the 6th round or Kittle in the 7th round, in NFFC, I'm comfortable with that, or even waiting on a Bowers. Of course, I want to have at least 4 wide.
Oh, quiet.
I want to have a stud quarterback and that running back. So if I got to sacrifice 1, it's all going to depend on how the board's falling and how the room's shaping up. But if I had to make 1 sacrifice, it's probably the tight end, depending upon who's there.
Matt, we'll get back to that topic in a second. I like what you just said there. For me, real quick, I got a couple tight ends I like at each tier. So I'm never reaching for a tight end in this year's drafts. I'm interested in those guys. If you present me, if I'm in the back end of the draft in that 8 to 12 range, and I get to that turn, and you want to hand me a Kincaid or a McBride, I got no problem clicking on those guys. But it depends on the build. For sure, if I have a heavy wide receiver build early, and I know in the 5th round I'm drafting early in the 5th round. And I got another good receiver locked up, then yeah, I like the way it looks when you have 3 strong receivers. You come back, you add one of those elite tight ends. and then you could still get a solid wide receiver 4. And then you're just heavy, you're a heavy 0 RB build. So yeah, no problem either way. So I don't want to waste much time on that. Nelson, what do you got?
No, I agree. And it's format specific. So FFPC, like I said, I want one of those top tight ends. That's my preference on how I want to build teams over there. And then in the NFFC, I'm looking at it as if I'm in the back half where, end of the 4th round, 5th round, I'm probably looking at, Kincaid and McBride, because I've identified it as this way. I look at it as I like Njoku and Bowers, and I think that's the drop off this year is right after those guys, unless NFFC and Taysom Hill is a tight end eligible.
We let that cat out of the bag last week, guys, and then all of a sudden Taysom Hill started moving up 2 rounds in all the high stakes drafts. So I'm not saying it was us, but it was odd that
for sure. So I think he's the other guy that's not so sneaky anymore. But what I've identified with tight end this year is I want to have good tight end play. For me, I don't want to have a bunch of teams where I punt back tight end and I end up with these guys that on paper, and I think we touched base on this last week, but on paper, it looks great. Like, I got a couple of guys, they got some upside, and I'm just looking at it from a positive standpoint. But at the end of the day, those guys are not target earners on their offense, and they're going to be very inconsistent. I want a tight end that is part of the game plan week in, week out. And the top guys are going to have duds, like your Kelseys and everything. They're going to have bad games, but I want a tight end that for the most part is always getting looked at on a weekly basis. And I want points out of that tight end position. I feel I'm confident enough that at running back, whether it's my RB2 or it's my wide receiver, that I can figure out who that player is that's going to fill in. And I'm not saying that I'm going to figure out the next Kyron or Puka. Those guys are, that's once in a few years that, that stuff, happens. It's not every year, and it's very hard to find those guys. But I'm talking about like rounds like 8, 9, 10. I think there's guys that are going to be valuable where they're going. And I want to have one of those top tight ends. I think like Evan Ingram, again, NFFC, like McBride, Kincaid, they go like 4-5 turn, sometimes, they drop a little bit. Laporta was a guy that I was going to be out on, but now that he's like, I have a draft, last night, where in the prime time he fell in the 4th round, and it was like middle of the 4th round. I'll take him.
It's
there.
crazy. Yeah, Nelson, you're right. With Laporta, you remember like 4 months ago when ADP came out and draft started, whoever was drafting that early made Laporta a 2nd rounder. He was going between picks 19 and 24, and everybody, the whole fantasy industry was outraged by it. I'm not taking Laporta in the 2nd. And everybody was groupthink and moved into the 3rd and now 4th. So I'm with you on that one. I would have never touched Laporta in the 2nd round, but the fact that now he goes in the middle of the 4th round and you can build a room where it's 3 strong wide receivers, and then you come back in the 4th round and Laporta is sitting there for you in that offense. Now I'm back in. So it is crazy with Laporta.
When I look at Laporta, for example, or, again, if you're high on Kincaid and McBride, those are 2 guys that in the range of outcomes, they could catch 100 balls this year. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that could be the case. So when you look at the receivers that are going in that range, that's where the tight end, the elite tight end makes sense to me, because I feel like those receivers that you're getting there in that, in that range, you can get in the 6th round and it might be very similar.
And this goes for everybody, because you know what? Some people have Evan Ingram included in that range. They love him just as much as Kincaid or McBride. Some people, have Pitts as well. So, I mean, it's just all drafters' preference, but yeah, no doubt about it. Guys, I don't want to let this go any further with, getting back to Matt's topic with him talking about, the tight end. And if there's one position that he's going to punt this year, it is tight end. I thought it'd be a good topic as we're talking about putting yourself on draft boards here is what I find in a lot of my drafts. And another thing that is always the toughest decision for me, besides, like I said, those receivers, is I know a lot of you see most teams, I'd say 6 to 8 teams in every draft that after 5 rounds, you usually have 1 solid running back and 4 pretty good receivers. And then I feel like this year, that 6th rounds of high stakes drafts is really the turning point, for drafters. Are you going to clip one of those elite quarterbacks that are still on the board there, the Strouds? Maybe you want to move up Love or Murray a little bit. Do you want to go after your RB2 right there before, the big turn comes and you might lose out on a solid RB2 that is in a different tier? Do you want to clip one of those tight ends we just talked about, the Pittses, the Evan Ingrams, or do you want to go after your wide receiver 5, which is a really, it's a really popular strategy. I see it every night in high stakes drafts. People are going and rostering their wide receiver 5 before they have their solid RB2, their tight end, or their elite quarterback. So my question to all of you guys is, you're sitting there in the 6th round. Most people in drafts have that 1 running back, 4 wide receivers. Which position are you inclined to take before the other 3 and make a priority for you? And which one you want to punt and say, hey, listen, I'll see it down the road. I'll make that work. But you know what? Let me go get this guy right, this position right now. Nelson, let's start with you, bud. I'm not in the Dan role. I forgot that I was hosting right there. I had to put out a name.
Yeah, so it's format specific. So if I'm in the 6th round and you're telling me that I have a running back with 4 wide receivers, what am I doing? FFPC, I'm clicking on Bowers or Njoku. Every time. Doesn't really matter like who's there. I want one of those top tight ends. I don't think there's anyone that is going to necessarily slip to the 6th round that I'm going to be like, oh, I gotta have this guy. So FFPC, that's where I'm going. If you're telling me that my build is 4 wide and a running back in the NFFC in the 6th round, see, I'm not struggling, but I need to come to the realization that I'm not going to have much Lamar Jackson or CJ Stroud this year, because where they're going in the NFFC, that 6th round is going to be my 5th wide receiver that I'm possibly taking there, or I'm going to be pushing up a running back in the NFFC. Tight end usually gets.
You're more inclined to punt quarterback and put a QB room together and a tight end room together.
Correct. Yeah. Because I'm looking at it as sometimes you have, not sometimes, most of the time you have Jordan Love. Kyler Murray might be there for you in the 7th round. Dak, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff. There's a bunch of quarterbacks, and if I push that back, I think there's a sweet spot, and I'm not necessarily going to be taking, a guy like Stroud or Anthony Richardson. That's another guy that kind of goes in the 6th round. Probably going to have, very little of those guys. So I'm looking at it as I'll push QB back. If Love or Kyler is not there for me, because that's kind of like my next tier of quarterbacks, I'll push it back and I'll double tap it. So I'll end up with like a Caleb Williams and a Jared Goff. I'll end up with, Jaden Daniels and Dak or Trevor Lawrence. So I'll end up with like those kind of quarterbacks. So that's kind of what I'm doing based on the format.
Yeah. Maddie, what do you got, bud?
For me, I'm not advocating punting tight end. Just in the NFFC, I see like Pitts right now and Ingram are 6th rounders, Kittle 7th round, Ferguson 8, Bowers 9, and Njoku 10. So I'm not advocating punting there. But in that 6th round, I mean, Stroud's tough for me to pass on in a 6-point passing league where I think he could go biblical this year, as I stated earlier in the thing. So, but if I do pass here, I think there's enough quarterbacks in that 7th round of like a Love, a Kyler, or I'm totally fine starting off with Jaden Daniels. And even if I package that together with like Caleb, as I mentioned earlier. So, I mean, it's what are you comfortable with? And in this type of build where I have the 4 receivers, I have the 1 running back. I mean, in certain instances, I'm looking at guys. I might even go receiver because there's Worthy, there's Watson, there's Jaden Reed. Deontay Johnson should catch a tuck. I want a stable of stud wide receivers. Again, we're not going to get all these wide receivers right.
Yeah.
And,
so you're player specific, you're saying, Matt, and I
Yes.
feel like, I mean, most of us are, I guess, if I agree with you if you give me CJ Stroud there in the 6th, I tend to say, all right, you know what, let me build this team now with Stroud. But yeah, I get it. It's player specific, but just thought process wise, which position are you more inclined to say, hey, it's rounds, I gotta get my RB2 before the others, or my elite tight end, like that.
For me, I look at the 7th, 8th round as running back rich. So if I have 1 running back, I could wait to that 7th, 8th round, even probably more so to the 8th round, depending upon. Now it's changing a little. I probably want a Javonte or a Chase Brown, so maybe I have to make that move in the 7th. But I think if you set it up right, I think the board is allowing you things this year that it wasn't allowing you last year. Like last year, you had to make that choice between Rashad White and Alexander Madison. And if you took White, you hit a home run. If you took Madison, you struck out. So it's a fine line right there. So,
Dan.
Yeah, I'm right with Nelson and Matt here. I mean, I think if I can get Ingram or Pitts, I'm probably doing that. There are a lot of fun wide receivers I can grab in the 6, to be a kind of my wide receiver 5 hammer, as it were. I have the same trouble as Nelson grabbing the quarterback there, just because I think there's enough good ones available later, and my running back too is the spot that I'm most comfortable punting on. So I would rather build out that wide receiver room or add the elite tight end, then maybe come back in the 7th and grab that running back. And then maybe in the 8th, I worry about quarterback, because you can still get Murray, Daniels, Prescott in the 8th and 9th rounds a lot of times. So I think that, there's a lot of ways you can go about building your team, but I like just going ahead and getting those receivers fleshed out, either with the 5th wide receiver or the tight end, and then moving on to the other positions. And if I wait until the 7th, 8th round to grab my RB2, that means I'm pretty much set at wide receiver and tight end. And so other than grabbing a quarterback, I can just sit and hammer running backs for a while and not have to worry about taking any more receivers until we get closer to the end of the draft.
And guys, just so I can kind of explain a little bit on my thought process, I'm grabbing a wide receiver 5 before my RB2 or quarterback, tight end. I have a tier break. So with my rankings, if the draft room lets a couple of these receivers fall, that I think I just believe like they could be really good and they have huge upside in the 6th round, that's where I'll take my wide receiver 5, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to, I'm going to be honest with myself and say, hey, one of these wide receivers that I took might not pan out. It just might not work out. There might be an injury, and I'll take this guy as my wide receiver 5. And now, like, that's my strong nucleus, and I can just pound, running back. I can figure out, double tap my quarterback. I can figure out the rest of the positions later. So, like, a couple of guys that, stick out to me in the 6th round would be like JSN. I think is a guy that I'm probably not passing on after I have 4 wide receivers. If they let me have him in the 6th, I'm going to take him as my wide receiver 5. I've already talked about Watson. He's a guy that I have passed at times when I've had that build, because I I build a lot of my teams the way Chris, had described. I'll pass him and I'll see that like he makes it to the 7th round. So that's where I was like, oh, okay. Like, even though I'm high on him, the rest of the room, not necessarily so high, but those would be 2 guys that like stick out to me. I'm trying to think if there's like another receiver. That's probably it, like in the 6th round. And then like, not as a number 5, but like Adunzie is another guy that like I need to get exposure to. So I know he's getting fired up in drafts. So there's like no discount on him. So I gotta, figure out where I pick spots where I can draft him.
Gotcha.
Yep. Makes sense. All right, guys, we are at $1:30 here, 1.5 hours of fantasy
Flew by.
goodness. Yeah, it really did. So I think we're at the point where we need to wrap this up and get everybody out of here. But we would just want to thank our listeners for hanging with us all this time. And hopefully this was very valuable for you. If you like the show, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the Player Profiler YouTube network. If you're looking for anything in specific, especially with Nelson over on FTN, he's got his own high stakes package over there. Nelson, you want to talk just real quick about that and we'll get out of here?
Yeah. So over at FTN Fantasy, I've got my high stakes package, gets access to my rankings, my cheat sheet. I put it together. A lot of guys, it's funny because I thought I was like, one of the only boomers that still prints out his cheat sheet and crosses off names, in a draft. But
paper and pen forever. Paper and pen forever, baby.
Yeah. So I'm a paper and pen guy, and believe it or not, there's a lot of
graph paper.
Yeah, the graph paper. Yep. So there's a lot of boomers, I guess, over at FTN because they ask for PDF or Excel. So I'll put that out there for them, so that gives them a little bit more flexibility for their drafts. I got the Discord chat, which gets access to me 24/7, and not just myself, but just everybody, because it's a really good group of guys just talking about today's news and different draft strategies and things like that. So I find that to be invaluable. That's an important piece too, as like you're drafting and these you're in these fantasy drafts and everything, and you have somebody to kind of bounce ideas off of. So we got like a good like family group of guys that go back and forth and help each other out. So yeah, take a look if anyone's interested.
Awesome. All right, guys, that is it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check us out next week. Our drafting is in high gear right now. We're busy stuffing our bags with our best bet players, and we're going to share those players and those strategies next week as well. And looking forward to seeing
Monday.
that.
Next Monday, one week difference.
For
change next Monday. The show. We're all flying out to Vegas Tuesday.
Yes, we've all got to do it Monday so we can get out to Vegas. But and then we've also got that NYC Super Board we're going to be looking at, which should be a lot of fun as well. So make sure you tune in next week. And for everybody on the show, we are out of here.